Hi, everyone. This is Dante King, and I am going live tonight because there's a video actually that was sent to me, which featured the producer and music mogul Pharrell Williams and some comments that he made recently. And the video that was sent to me featured Roland Martin and some of the guests of his on his show speaking about the comments that Pharrell had made, and there were basically comments that centered around anti-blackness without necessarily naming that the comments were intended to be anti-black. I don't think he even intended the comments to be anti-black, but they were, while also at the same time reinforcing white supremacy norms and falsehoods about survival in American society or the reality of American society. Or I think another way to say it is white people's experiences in American society versus that of non-white people and especially Black people. And so he tried to make like a general set of comments and statements that have offended a lot of people that I know. So I'm going to share my screen and play a little bit of Roland Martin and him discussing the comments with his panelist. And then I'm going to share my own observations and an analysis that I've done and just, a piece that I wrote about it. Um, I'm a writer by trade, y'all. So if you are not familiar with my work, please go to DanteKing.com. Again, that's DanteKing.com. You can also purchase the book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, White Psychopathology, Collective Psychosis, and Trauma in America, which will provide you with more in-depth detail around my analysis, my framing and perspective on this Pharrell situation, but even on a broader scale, um, American life in a society that was founded upon cultural standards and institutional standards and norms of whiteness and white supremacy. All right, here we go.
So Avis mentioned Pharrell, and I saw this video on social media, and I just sat there and said, here's another example of an entertainer not knowing what the hell they are talking about and sounding utterly clueless. Now, I don't know where this was. It was at some event. I don't know. Again, I roll a clip.
As we look at what's going on in the current political climate, I'm just saying to anyone turning by y'all, I hate politics. Like despise them. It's a magic trick that it's not real. I don't believe in either side. So I think when you pick a side, you are only, you are inadvertently supporting division. Yeah, it's not a popular point of view, but I just gotta say that, think about it. The wells are drying up, and okay, now the diversity's off the table, now equity's off the table, now inclusion's off the table. So that makes me ask myself, okay, so how do we survive? Well, are there Black people in there tonight? Yeah. And in your heart, do you think for what it is that you do and who you are, do you think you're the best? Okay, so do you want the job because you're Black or because you're the best? Do you want someone to support your startup because you're Black or because you're the best? Right, so I think now for me it's about us having the best ambition. That's the reason why you should support these businesses. Yes, they happen to be Black and brown, but it should be based on the thesis that we're the best, not because we are a total shade of a skin color. That's a point of view that I have now that I'm resting on. And if diversity, equity, and inclusion ever comes back in style, cool. But in the meantime, I want to focus on being the best because I can bank on that. Because that's what's going to get you the position. I don't want you to give me anything. I want you to panic and not let me out the room because I'm the best.
I'm with you, Roland.
Run that back.
And so I don't even think that there's a need to run it back. I'm not going to run it back. I feel like I understood what Pharrell Williams was trying to say. I too share the same concern that because of the attack on civil rights within the context of a racist country, and particularly rights around, not being discriminated against. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, all of the initiatives and freedoms that were the freedoms that were fought for by certain initiatives that had been put in place by certain civil rights movements, demonstrations that had been done in past decades, where people have literally fought for equal treatment or to be treated justly or humanely in this country, that all of those things are under attack. They've been under attack. And so by obliterating civil rights laws or going after civil rights laws, which is what we're seeing, what we have been seeing, I would say forever, even though people don't acknowledge that this has been going on for forever in this country. But even though we're seeing it more clearly in this moment, in terms of how different liberties are under attack based on certain groups that are non-white and particularly non-male. Pharrell was saying, how then are we going to survive when they're taking away all of these different programs that were meant to try to give us access? What he left out, and what Roland and his panelists took issue with, which is what I took issue with, is the reality that white America functions on a preferential program that prioritizes white people, which set the basis for the need of such programs in the first place, or such laws, so to speak. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, along with the Supreme Court ruling that occurred in April of that year that upheld the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Okay, whenever we're having these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, so many people, either because they are, acclimated to the American cultural um, uh, practice of always focusing this conversation on Black and Brown people without figuring white racial identity and white affirmative action into this conversation. And so, on one hand, Pharrell is correct in the sense that as white people, primarily with the assistance of certain people that they've gone and tried to ally with, which have been East Asian people, as they are trying to attack the rights and the freedoms and the liberties of Black people, of also kind of Latinx people, Hispanic people, who, by the way, for the most part, voted conservatively. So let's be very clear about that. So a lot of things that are happening with the Hispanic community, the Latinx community, has to do with much of that group voting for the party that is the political party that is in power currently. Okay. What I wanted to add to this conversation or to this discussion are some points that I think are very valuable in a recontextualization of how we frame discussions around DEI, and to also name that, Pharrell's comments, while he may have had good intentions, they are extremely problematic because, for one, they don't take into consideration the reality of historical and cultural white supremacy and the way that white supremacy and white affirmative action and white sponsorship functions within our culture and society. Number two, there is this seemingly this guidance that he's giving to Black and Brown people to lean out of racial pride and don't focus on the fact that you are Black. Focus on being the best, right? So lean out of Black identity all the way. And that is counter to the way that many and most white people are taught in terms of the philosophy of whiteness and white identity. White people believe that they are deserving. They really walk through the world with an entitlement philosophy that is trained in from birth, so to speak. And they believe that they deserve opportunity and positionality and to be in positions of influence and power because they're white. And the whole philosophy and ideology of whiteness is the concept and the idea that because we are white, because we are of European ancestry, we are superior. So here's my analysis of the situation. And I'm going to read it because I don't want to miss certain points, right? I'm trying to make it engaging though, right? So what we are seeing in Pharrell's behavior and thought process is not simply an individual opinion or a celebrity misstep. It is a direct reflection of the weight of hundreds of years of forced assimilation, an intergenerational social conditioning process in which the oppressed are trained, taught, encouraged, and even rewarded for internalizing the values, worldviews, and ideologies of the oppressor. So in this case, to be American is to become like white people. This dynamic stretches back to colonial law, early American legislation, and the systemic construction of race itself. Within this lineage, Pharrell becomes an example of something much larger, the Black capitalist and the Black celebrity figure whose identity and role are fundamentally modeled after the white capitalist and white celebrity archetype. Throughout his career, Pharrell has been surrounded by white dominated institutions and has enjoyed proximity to white sponsors, white mentors, white executives, and white structures of approval and validation. This is not a criticism of his relationships, it is an analysis of the environment in which his worldview was shaped. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, he has absorbed and internalized many of the narratives, assumptions, and belief systems that accompany those relationships. But this is not unique to him. It is true for virtually all Black people navigating institutions built, designed, and governed by whiteness. One of the key points I make across both of my books, The 400-Year Holocaust, White America's Legal, Psychopathic, and Sociopathic Black Genocide, and the Revolt Against Critical Race Theory, and Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, which is my newest book, White Psychopathology, Collective Psychosis, and Trauma in America, is that Blackness, as defined in America, is not biological, not genetic. And let me pause here and go to another screen because I realized something. But Blackness in and of itself is not biological. It's not genetic at all, by any means whatsoever. And I'll just keep going. It's not rooted. Blackness is not rooted in any scientific category of human variation. Blackness is a constructed identity created through law, policy, and social engineering. From the colonial period forward, legislatures defined who was Black, what Blackness meant, what Black people could do, what they could not do, and even how their bodies, labor, morality, and humanity would be legally interpreted. So I think this deserves somewhat of a pause because I think it's important to understand that Pharrell is operating based on a set of beliefs that he has picked up and has absorbed based on his socialization and training in a society that has been built and shaped by white supremacy, on the premises of white supremacy. It is how he's gained his education. He has gained his education through these institutions. Give me 1 second, actually. So yeah, he's gained his education through these institutions. And virtually everything that he knows, his socialization, along with mine, along with every other Black American person, along with Hispanic American people, along with Asian American people, they have gotten their socialization, i.e. forced assimilation, through navigating white institutions, white cultural norms, etc. Okay. Because of this, everything we call Black identity, Black success, Black professionalism, Black respectability, or Black excellence exists within frameworks shaped by Eurocentric values. Our ideas of achievement, legitimacy, credibility, and worthiness are all filtered through systems that were never designed for our liberation. In that sense, Pharrell's worldview is not an anomaly. It is a predictable byproduct of a system that conditions Black people to measure themselves against Eurocentric standards while discouraging us from embracing our own racial pride or cultural grounding in ways that challenge the dominant racial order, which is white supremacy. This brings us to a deeper contradiction that lies at the center of this discussion: the racial double standard around pride, identity, and deservedness. Many white people openly lean into a sense of racial pride and entitlement, even if they do not name it explicitly. They benefit from a cultural structure that reinforces white identity as inherently superior, inherently legitimate, and inherently worthy. Whether we examine history, government, law, media, or everyday social interactions, whiteness is positioned as the unquestioned norm. White culture is treated as universal. White institutions are presented as neutral. White narratives are accepted as objective. Excuse me, y'all. And white leadership is assumed to be qualified by virtue of whiteness alone. This is the core of what I refer to as the psychological and socio-political infrastructure of whiteness, a system of collective belief in which whiteness represents inherent deservedness. It is the foundation of white racial identity across centuries. It is the belief system that has justified colonization, enslavement, and segregation in modern day inequity. It is the structure in which white people have been taught that their identity is synonymous with superiority. What is important to understand is that this pride and entitlement is not usually expressed through explicit slogans or overt declarations of supremacy. Instead, it is embedded in the ways white people are socialized to see themselves and the world. Author Joe Fagan, in his book, White Racial Frame, he talks about everything that I'm saying. And I also, again, discussed it in my book, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness. So please go to my website at danteking.com to subscribe to my site, follow my work. You can also follow me on Instagram at Dante D. King Official. Please like and share this video with as many people as possible. Yet when Black people express racial pride, cultural identity, or collective belonging, it is often framed as threatening, political, divisive, or unprofessional. Black pride is treated as something that must be justified or explained, whereas white pride operates silently and invisibly as the baseline for American identity. This double standard is precisely what we see reflected in Pharrell's comments. When he suggests that Black people should not want a position because they are Black, but because they are the best, he is doing the exact opposite of what white people are socialized to do. White people are encouraged through unspoken norms, through institutional design, through cultural reinforcement, to believe they deserve opportunities simply because of who they are, simply because they are white. They are not told to distance themselves from their identity. They are not told to suppress their pride. They are not told to avoid leaning into their networks, connections, or racial advantages. They are not told to be the best. They are not told to be the best in order to justify their presence. They are told that they are the best because they are white. And I think we just have to contend with this for a moment in the way that pride, entitlement, deservedness functions for people who believe that they are the superior group versus those of us who will not admit that we buy into the reality or the stigma that we are oppressed, but we are an oppressed group. And so therefore that drives a behavior that is counter to those that are in the non-oppressed group, right? Or those that are in the conglomeration of white identity politics or white supremacy, which are all white people. Instead, Black people are the ones pressured to distance ourselves from our identity to avoid appearing too Black. and to overperform in order to be considered legitimate. Pharrell's message reflects the internalization of this dynamic. By discouraging Black people from grounding their ambitions in their racial identity or historical experience, and by encouraging them to focus on being the best, he is reinforcing one of the most enduring components of racial conditioning, which is the myth of meritocracy, the myth that working hard, getting an education, going to school, doing all of these things, right, to show that you are qualified and capable will get you into doors and get you into opportunities. This is not true at all. And as someone who has a background in human resources management and leadership extending over 20 years, I've seen many instances, dozens of instances, I would even say in the hundreds of scenarios and encounters where white people are not qualified, they're not capable, they've not demonstrated any degree of competence, and they're still given opportunity. They are not the best. And as a matter of fact, they've demonstrated mediocrity, white mediocrity, and white inadequacy, and they are still put into certain leadership and management positions. They're still being given opportunity. I mean, we can look, for example, at the president of the United States of America, who is has been convicted in a civil suit of sexual assault and sexual predation. One judge wrote that in certain jurisdictions, it would be considered RA grape, so to speak. He's been convicted on 34 counts, I believe, of felony fraud or something of that nature. He has demonstrated the most egregious conduct and behavior in terms of the things that he's willing to say and the statements that he's willing to make to people. What I'm getting at here is he's violated every American standard norm, even the law, and he still has the support of millions of Americans. And so this is not about exhibiting appropriate conduct or outperforming or overperforming or showing or demonstrating that you're capable or competent. And so by Pharrell driving home that narrative and reinforcing a white supremacy, white identity politic myth of meritocracy or ideology, which is very dangerous, he is perpetuating anti-Blackness and also upholding and standing in as a gatekeeper of white supremacy. Because what he is saying is not rooted in reality. It's a narrative that white people have perpetuated for hundreds of years now. In reality, again, opportunity in America is shaped far more by networks, sponsorship, access, inherited advantage, generational wealth, and racial preference than by individual effort. Let's be very clear. White people benefit from centuries of accumulated advantages written into law, economics, housing, education, and every institution that matters. Go back and watch the Roland Martin interview on Roland Martin Unfiltered. One of the examples that he gives is how there were studies that have been done, recent studies, and I actually include this in both of my books, Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness and the 400-Year Holocaust. But dozens of studies that were recently done, or hundreds rather, or examples that where you had, for example, white homeowners stand in for homes that were being appraised for refinances, and that of Black and brown people, but particularly where Black people were concerned. When a Black person stood in for a home appraisal, or they kept up pictures or anything that alluded to the fact that a Black person or Black family might be living within that home, the homes were appraised up to 20, 30, sometimes 50%, 60% less than what the actual home was supposed to be appraised for. Every study where a white person, or example where a white person stood in for an appraisal, or there was a home that indicated that potentially or presumably a white family lived there, those homes were appraised for double the value in many instances, 30, 40% more in certain other instances, okay? So there's so much evidence that proves that we are not in a post-racial society. This is not about being the best. We do not live in a meritocracy at all. And so again, Pharrell not understanding and not having a critical historical and cultural analysis on the topic He offered comments that were not rooted in fact, but more so a belief that he's adopted that has been programmed into him by white society and white institutions. So white institutions operate on an unspoken system of white affirmative action, a set of preferences, connections, and institutional protections that consistently and predictably advantage white people, whether they recognize it or not. This is one of the central arguments I lay out in Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, that whiteness itself is treated as a credential, a qualification, and a form of social capital that opens doors long before merit ever enters the conversation. White people do not need to be the best. They just need to be white. Their networks do the rest. Their institutions do the rest. Their historical advantages do the rest. So when Pharrell says Black people should want the job because they are the best, he is unknowingly participating in a larger narrative that places the burden of proof on Black individuals rather than on the system. He is telling Black people to adopt a standard that white people themselves are not held to. He is encouraging Black people to lean out of their racial identity while white people continue to lean into theirs, whether consciously or unconsciously. This is not an attack on Pharrell. This is an analysis of a system that shapes all of us. It is the system I have studied, documented, and traced historically in the 400-year Holocaust, where I lay out the legal and political mechanisms through which white supremacy was constructed, enforced, and normalized in America. It is the system I further deconstruct in Diagnosing Whiteness and Anti-Blackness, where I reveal the psychological, institutional, and cultural dynamics that continue to structure our society today. These dynamics, forced assimilation, internalized Eurocentrism, the mythology of meritocracy, the conditioning of Black self-doubt, and the unexamined nature of white identity are not accidents. They are deliberate outcomes of a long legacy of racial domination. And until we address these dynamics directly, we will continue to misinterpret the actions of Black public figures as individual shortcomings rather than reflections of the systems that reproduce them. I share this analysis because it is essential for understanding how identity, power, and racial psychology function in America today. It is not enough to critique individuals. We must examine the structures that shape our thinking, our self-concepts, and our expectations of one another. For those who want to engage more deeply with this work, explore my research, attend upcoming events, or follow the development of my docuseries in a course that's online on my website. It's an online course which features 10 not virtual, but 10 modules, online modules of a panel discussion along with follow-up questions. You can find everything at danteking.com or diagnosing whiteness and anti-blackness.com. So again, go to danteking.com. You can also follow me across all social media platforms. On Instagram, I'm at Dante D. King Official. On Twitter, I am at Dante King 2020. You can also go to Dante King Author Official on Facebook. Please feel free to like, comment on, and share this video with everyone you know. My goal in this work is to uncover the historical truths, psychological patterns, and cultural forces that continue to shape our racial landscape. Understanding these forces allows us to break free from inherited narratives and begin constructing new ones grounded in truth, justice, and collective liberation. So that said, I hope that this live was informative, man, and that it inspires you and more people within your family networks to get more involved in doing this work and to hold yourself accountable, people in your networks accountable, and our collective society, including our leaders, accountable, especially entertainers and celebrities who we uphold sometimes as icons, as great people, when all we should be regarding them for really are their contributions to the entertainment industry. And that's it. That's a whole other topic of conversation, though. All right, y'all. Have a great evening. See you soon.